everybody, welcome back to Eggs the Podcast. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Taylor Style. You can kind of feel it in the air right now. Winter's fading, the light's changing, and we're closing in on the end of Q1. And that's the in-between season when your schedule's busy, but your wardrobe still thinks it's January. I've always been bad at that transition. I either overdress for the weather or I'm rotating the same heavy stuff even when things start to get warm. And that's one of the things I love about my membership at Taylor Style. My wardrobe just adjusts without me even having to think about it. I'm a subscriber right now, and every few weeks I get a box with hand-picked outfits chosen by a real stylist, refined by their AI, and the crazy part is they actually nail it most of the time. Stuff I would never go buy, but I end up wearing nonstop just because it works. Taylor, spelled T-A-E-L-O-R, is a men's clothing rental subscription that uses AI and real human stylists to send pieces that fit your life and the season you're actually in. So as we move into spring, I'm getting lighter layers, stuff that works for conferences, meetings, travel, etc., without having to buy a whole new closet. No shopping, no laundry, no long-term commitment. If you want to make the seasonal shift easy, Egg Show listeners are getting 25% off their first month with code EGGS at taylor.style. That's Taylor.style. Use promo code EGGS and take 25% off your first month. Taylor handles the clothes so that you can handle everything else. That's Taylor. Less closet stress, more forward momentum. And now, back to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eggs the Podcast. Today's special guest is Tim Packer. Tim is the founder and creator behind Tim Packer Art Academy. Tim, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. Thrilled to have you. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, your background a little bit. You have kind of an interesting story, and you've come from maybe a non-traditional or less than expected place. So let's talk a little bit about your history and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but yeah, I started out when I was 12 years old. I knew I wanted to be an artist. So I took commercial art in high school, studied graphic design in college, came out at 19 years of age, ready to take on the world. And then just ended up in some really low level positions, just kind of soul sucking work, and realized there was people that were a lot more talented than me. And I just thought, the dream is not going to happen. The Toronto Police Force was hiring, and that seemed like a good steady paycheck with a pension. So I joined the Toronto Police Force and did that for 18 years. And then I guess I was in my 30s, and a good friend of mine on the police force was murdered in the line of duty. And that really just kind of struck me about, we all know we're not guaranteed another 50, 60 years or whatever, but I had basically quit painting, and most people didn't even know I was an artist. And so that just kind of really brought me kind of face to face with kind of my mortality, and thought, I can't wait till I retire to get back to painting. So I got back painting again, got pretty serious about it. And it was around that time too, I was first introduced to the idea of the growth mindset, that, your talent's not something that's limited. Your talent is something that you build. And I kind of really didn't buy into it, but I thought, well, in case it's right, let me live my life for a year as though that's true. And so I really started working on improving everything about my art, and tackling those things I knew that were weaknesses. And a funny thing happened. Within a year, I was a lot better. Within 3 years, my wife and I were talking about me leaving the police force to paint full time. And in 2000, I actually did that. And so that was kind of a bit of a struggle, because I had a lot of skill. I'd earned a lot of awards, but I didn't know how to turn that into actual viable business. But around 2005, things clicked. And that's when my current voice, I kind of, was discovered my voice, and that became very popular. So then I had a very successful career as an artist. But then I started realizing that, that there was a lot of artists out there kind of shared that same dream, but they had no idea how to get there. And I also realized that a lot of the things they were being told, I believe, were just dead wrong. And so I started doing started my YouTube channel, started sharing what I'd learned with other artists. And then in 2019, I almost died twice. I had a thyroid from hell. But that, when you have those kind of near-death experiences, again, you kind of take a look at your life. And I just realized that I'd been playing it safe, just kind of doing the teaching as a side passion kind of thing on YouTube. And if I really, really wanted to have impact with helping other people change their lives, I really needed to get serious and actually turn it into a business. So that's when I decided I was going to switch my focus from mainly just painting and selling paintings to to teaching. So I started my online art academy. So that was in 2020, and we've done really well. We've helped a number of artists, but we've done in 5 years over 600,000 in course sales, and it looks like this year is going to be our biggest year yet. And so and I've had the best part about it is I've had a number of students who have already gone on to kind of great success, and they're living their lives, making a very good living from their art.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. And one of the things that really stood out to me was this pivot or this moment in your life where you were talking about discovering the growth mindset.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, and maybe I'll just project a little bit here. So maybe this isn't your experience, but as a guy who's also artistic and has spent my whole life drawing and doing things like that, I found that I often struggle with sort of this scarcity versus growth thing. Like, so I'll go through these little waves where I'll feel like things are going good. So it's like, we're doing good. We're not hungry anymore, and I can just do what I want to do. And then things will dip, and then it's scarce again. And then everybody's back into, back on their haunches, and they're all worried about money and all this stuff again. And then, work will come in, and then it'll go away and we'll feel good. And then it'll fall back off. And so this scarce, what do they call it? Scarcity mindset has been prevalent in my career. And, I sort of have, thought about growth as a mindset, but I don't, I probably don't dwell there as often as I should. So I wonder if you talk a little bit about just sort of, first of all, what led to you discovering that, or making that decision to chase down something like that. And then, if you talk a little bit about how you actually manifest it in your life.
Yeah, sure. So it was, it was when I was getting serious about just getting back to painting, just because I thought I'm an artist, that's what I need to do, but I wasn't painting. I had no thought of leaving the police force. I thought that, maybe when I retired, I could turn it into a side hustle. But at the time, too, I was a detective in the commercial crime unit. I was investigating frauds over $2 million. So I was like a very analytical mind. And I thought, well, if I want to get serious about my art, I need to do some research. So I bought a lot of books. And there was one book, it was called Becoming a Successful Artist. And I thought, well, yeah, that sounds like that's what I want to learn. And it was interviews with all these artists who were successful. And there was one interview with a Canadian artist by the name of Harley Brown. And he said in this interview that, like, it's not about talent. Like, the idea of talent as some sort of gift that you have or don't have is a myth. And he said it's all just about hard work. And he said, if someone wants to become an artist, and if they're willing to give it all they've got and do whatever's required, he said, I guarantee 100% they can be successful. And I mean, I kind of, as I was sitting there reading it, I kind of called BS, right? It's like, screw you, Harley Brown. Like, all these very successful people say that. They say, I didn't have any gift. I just worked really hard. But it's kind of like, I believed, yeah, you got sprinkled with the pixie dust when you were born. You've got it, and I don't have it. And I didn't want to hear this, because I was thinking, okay, does that mean that I gave up on my dream too soon? Maybe I could have been living my dream life now if I hadn't given up and just kind of made the decision that I wasn't talented enough. And I still didn't buy into the growth mindset. But I thought, what if he's right? What if he's right? And I was at this point, I was in my mid 30s. And I still have a lot of life ahead of me. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to live my life for a year as though I believe that this is true. And so I just, and the bad thing, Harley Brown didn't give me a plan, right? He just kind of opened the door to say this is possible, but I had no idea what to do. But I just thought, the first thing I'd read somewhere else too, that to improve as an artist, you need to paint at least 3 times a week. So I started scheduling my painting time first and marking it in the calendar, painting 3 times a week. And then also I started looking at, up until then, what I had been doing is just really painting or drawing on the things that relied on my strengths and avoiding those things that were weaknesses. And one of the big weaknesses for me was composition. I just had no idea about composition. And so I threw myself into kind of learning the theories of composition and mastering composition. And again, by the end of that year, my work had gotten amazingly better. I'd got into a couple shows, won a couple awards. And by the end of that year, I just bought into the whole thing. I guess this is true. And so then I just kept doing that. And then within 3 years, 3 years later, it's like I'd been elected to a couple national arts organizations in Canada. I'd been in a number of international juried shows. I'd won awards. I'd sold a lot of paintings. I was kind of very busy doing portrait commissions. And my wife, we had a conversation. I just had a studio open house where I'd had a lot of sales. I had a lot of commissions lined up to do. And my wife said, listen, sit down. We need to talk. I had no idea what was coming. I was actually kind of terrified of what we need to talk about. But she said, we need to talk not about if you leave the police force to paint full time, but when you do that to paint full time. And you could have knocked me over with a feather because my wife was a banker. I'm the dreamer. But she said to me, the one thing she said to me that actually I think also was a huge part of why I ended up being successful is she said, this isn't about you being fulfilled. That's not why I'm kind of suggesting this. She said, I actually think this might be in our best long-term financial interests if you really pursue this. And so she said, but I'll make a deal with you. She said, I'm willing to support you quitting your job, walking away from your pension, just as long as you commit now. If it ever becomes clear this is not in our best financial interest, you'll put on a suit and get a job. And because of the unit that I was working in, like I'd had the month-long computer crime course from the RCMP college, I had a skill set that was, easily translatable to the private sector. So that was our deal. So in 2000, I quit my job and started my life as an artist. It's still, after 18 years on the police force, though, the scariest thing I've ever done in my life is quitting my job and walking away from my pension.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Well, and it's awesome that your wife really pushed that sort of thing, especially coming from such an analytical standpoint. We're sort of in a similar situation in my family, which is my wife's a school teacher, but she's like the steady income.
Yeah.
And then I'm the one that experiments and tries everything out and flops and fails and makes money or whatever happens. And but it's really on her nudge to do that. Otherwise I probably wouldn't be doing it either.
Well, the thing I'm proudest about too is my wife was able to retire early because things went so well. So now she golfs 4 times a week in the summertime, and she was able to retire a lot earlier than she would have if I'd stayed on the police force. So
I love that.
That's really awesome. Can we talk about the first month or so after you quit the police force, and you said you had a bunch of commissions kind of lined up for portraitures. Was that like your thing? Was portraits your thing, or did you just do that because it was work?
No, that was the thing that I really gravitated to initially. Again, when I was deciding to get back into art, again, doing the research, because it's like, what should I paint? And everything said paint what you love. And so I had two young boys who were like 3 and 5 years old. So it's like, well, I love my boys. So I started painting pictures of my boys. And I was really good. Like I had a really good drawing skill. So those paintings got into shows and won awards. And then I started just painting pictures of friends. Like if we'd be at a pool party, I'd have my camera just looking for interesting shots. And then I'd paint people. And then, I'd have a show every year at my house while I was still in the police force, and people would come and they pretty much all bought the paintings that I'd done. And then people started commissioning me to do painting. So when I left the police force, I already had probably, I think there was 40 coppers in the fraud squad. I'd done commissions for like at least 20 of them for their kids, their wives, their whatever. And so when I left, I thought that's what I was going to do. But what I ended up finding out was that I loved painting people the way I wanted to paint them. I did not really enjoy painting people the way they wanted me to paint their people. And so after 2 years, I was fairly busy doing the portraits, but I just came to hate painting portraits. I thought I would rather have root canal than go into the studio and paint a picture of somebody's kid in the shirt they want, in the pose they want. And so that was kind of terrifying, because it's like, okay, now I've left my job, I left my pension, and I've let this turn into something that I don't want to do. And luckily I had a good friend of mine who was a very successful artist, because I had said to a few people, here's the situation I'm in now, that, I just hate what I have to do, but I guess I've made my bed and I need to lie in it. And, I'll paint landscapes on the side, and people will buy them because they go with the couch, but I'll never get the same sort of, respect for my landscapes and that I get from my portraits, and I'll just have to keep doing this. And a bunch of my artist friends said, yeah, that makes sense. And then I had one artist friend I said this to, and he just went up one side of me and down the other. He told me he was disgusted with me. And he was like, if you want to paint landscapes, paint freaking landscapes. But, who told you, what made you think it would be easy making this transition? Like, you need to really dig deep on this and just go after it. It's like, what makes you think you can't do it? So anyways, I came home and I told my wife what Neville had said. And I said, I'm painting landscapes now. And of course she was like, no, you're not. You've got a lot of commissions lined up. But we came upon another deal that I would spend half my time painting portrait commissions and the other half my time kind of exploring what I wanted to say in landscape and trying to figure that out. And if it ever got to the point where my landscapes, were selling for as much as my portraits, then I could make the switch. And now, most people don't even know that I used to paint portraits because I've been so successful now with my landscapes. But that took another 3 years in the studio of just trying things until kind of my ultimate voice came out. And when that was discovered, like, the world is not shy to let you know. I went from, barely making $25,000 in a year in those first few years, that when my current voice, the very first piece that I did that you would recognize as my work now, I was at a festival and that painting sold in the first 5 minutes of the show. The couple that bought it asked me if they could leave it there because they just got there. They wanted to walk around, and I could have sold that painting 20 times. And I eventually took it down and wrapped it up because people saw that painting and they wanted it. And then as soon as I told them it was sold, they just were disappointed and left. And so that was a clue. I'd never had any of my work get that kind of response. I'd done reasonably well at selling, but nothing like that. And then I did two more kind of in that style, and they were going into a charity auction, and they sold for double over what I was charging for my work. And so that made me think, okay, maybe this is the time now to kind of dig deep on this. And so I just, I hunkered down in the studio for a few months, and I decided to go into a big show in Toronto, the Toronto Indoor Art Expo, and I did 28,000 in sales in a weekend. And then I had 10 gallery owners give me their cards and ask me if I would please consider showing with them. And it was kind of like, okay, I guess this is it. I've never really looked back from then.
Let's discuss pricing. That's one of those things that, like, up and coming artists or anyone really in any industry has a hard time figuring out. I'm sure portraits, you kind of do one, you figure out time and commitment and how long it takes and studio time and expenses and stuff. But something like a landscape, something that could take you potentially hundreds of hours. I don't know how long it would take, but
not that long. I've been pretty quick.
Okay. Something that would take you quite a long time versus, and a different skill set versus, like, same repetitive, here's another photo of a kid.
Yeah.
Break that down for us.
Yeah, well, the whole pricing thing, there's so much information out there, I think, that is just wrong for artists. Telling people you have to put your prices high so that people value it. And I think that's the reason most artists don't sell. The reality is, and people say too, well, this painting took me 30 hours, so what should I charge? People go, oh, well, you should make X number of dollars an hour. It's like, who says? Like, when we start out, our time is not only worth nothing, it's worth less than nothing, right? We all start as beginners. So if you think about it this way, if you take $100 worth of material and the canvas, the paint, everything else, and you spend 8 hours and you create a painting that people wouldn't hang in their house if you were giving it to them, which is where we all start. Your time has a negative value. You've just devalued $100 worth of material to nothing. And then eventually you get to the point where people will pay you $100 for that painting. And it's like, oh, okay, well, now your time is worth nothing, but at least you're not devaluing it. And then if you can make, $300 from that painting and it takes you, well, now your time's worth $20, $30 an hour, whatever. But the public decides what the value of your art is. And I guess I should mention too, one of the other things most artists don't understand is there's not one art world. it's like a bunch of different art villages. And the biggest confusion is there's the village of academia and institutional art. So that's like publicly funded galleries, museums. That's the kind of stuff that's taught in a lot of universities, where postmodernism is really big, where it's all about the concept, right? What did the artist feel? That's where you get things like the meat dress, where with a banana duct tape to the wall, right? There was an exhibit in London in a very prestigious gallery. It was invisible artwork. Basically, that's what it was. It was like the emperor's new clothes, right? There was nothing there, but the artist submitted a description of what their invisible piece of work was, and people went there and nodded and talked about it and all that. Like, that's that village. The village where I live is what I like to call the village of commercial sales. And over in that other village too, artists get paid by grant committees, by funding bodies, but it's not individual people aren't buying those things and taking the banana home and duct taping it to their wall, right? It's to be talked about. But the village where I live is where it's real people buying artists' work to actually take home and hang on their walls or on their home or in their office. And the big difference is in that one village of the academia, it's all about what the artist felt. What did the artist feel? What was their message? In the village of commercial sales, it really doesn't matter what the artist thought. What matters is, how does the viewer feel when they see the piece of work? And ideally, in that village, what we want to do is we want to create work that stops people in their tracks. It takes their breath away, and they just have the feeling, I have to have this. It makes them feel something so good that they want to take it home and hang it on their walls. And over in this village, study after study has shown, and not only that, just sales bear it out, that what the average person really still values in art is everything that used to be important in art up until the 50s. Things like skill, things like composition, things like craft and beauty, things that actually get laughed at over in the academic side of things. But that's what real people really value. And so artists have to kind of understand, first of all, that you need to pick a village. And over in this village, the people decide what the art's worth, because what they'll do is they'll walk around an art festival. They'll find like 5 artists whose work they like, and they think, okay, we're going to buy from one of these 5. They're in our price range. And then they'll buy from the cheapest one. And so that's the thing. So initially you start off very, very low. But what happens is, as you have more and more sales, then you build the scarcity, then you build the urgency, and the prices start going up. But initially, it's better off to have your prices very low and sell lots than to try and squeeze the last nickel out of every painting and sell nothing. Because when you start selling, it kind of creates a buzz, and then you can raise your prices often in small increments.
Are you selling prints, or are you selling original paintings every time?
I do both. So my prints go from, I guess, like for like a 3 foot by 4 foot print of mine is like about $1,100 or $1,200, and a 3 foot by 4 foot original's about $8,000-9,000. But when I started out, of course, I was selling 2 foot by 2 foot paintings for like $200. But ideally, what you want to be when you're first starting out, you want to be that person that's the best value in the kind of against the competition, the people whose work is kind of similar to you, because what happens is you'll sell lots, and then you'll very quickly go beyond the price of the other people. Because I mean, nothing sells like sales. When people see that you're selling lots of work, that also reinforces their kind of feeling, well, I kind of like this artist's work, but it looks like everybody else likes it too. So it's like, okay, then they're more likely to buy.
Yeah. No, it's a funny thing because, we talked briefly, or what sort of kicked off this topic was talking about pricing and just trying to understand value. And there are a lot of things that factor into value. And one of those things is what you just touched on, which is just sort of social pressure. Yeah. And, so your work can fetch a higher dollar amount if there's kind of a competition here, which is, oh, well, he wants this. Now I want it. And so now I'm going to pay for it, and so I think it's kind of an interesting thing. And what I love about the story that you just kind of told, around pricing, but some of the things you talked about prior to that too, is you've really described this. It's the life of a creative person, but like, as we've discovered in this, doing this podcast, that same juice applies to your business or whatever it is. And what it is sort of maturing into self-expression. And it's this idea that, you start in a position where you're doing the work, that is, almost the commodity version of your work. You're just doing the thing to make money.
Yep.
And so, and I grew up, or my whole career has been in advertising and design, and so commercial art. And basically was my trajectory, right? You spend a lot of years doing things for them.
Yep.
And then as you get older or more experienced or more well-known or start making more money, or, even just your mindset changes, you start doing more work for me. You start doing more of the things that you want to do for you. And so I wondered if you would just talk a little bit more about just sort of, I guess, you're almost inventing a market, right? Like you've got to convince somebody that what you're putting together is actually worthwhile. Some things like maybe are objectively easier to sell. Like, not to say something or put down a landscape, but like landscapes are beautiful and they have nature to rely on and things like this, right? Where something, more that you might have characterized as being in sort of the other village, which is, I don't know, take any of these weird things people are doing.
Yeah.
But there's a market for both. And I think that's what's kind of exciting about it, is that there isn't a right answer here. And you actually can just pursue what you want to do.
Yeah. But you need to pick a village.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes an awful lot of sense.
There's no overlap. What a lot of artists do is they create work where it's like, I've got this deeper meaning that I want to convey, but I'm going to show some of my skill and craft in there too. And then the problem is no village bites, because in the academic village, they actually don't want to see skill. Things that the traditional stuff that used to be valued in art is seen as kind of bad. And in my village, it's like, we don't want to see a little bit of skill. We want to see mastery. And I guess that's the other thing too, is that, when you think about it, if you're trying to make a living doing something that people do for a hobby and pay to do, then you can't stop at just good in your growth and then try to make a living marketing that. And I also see that's what a lot of artists do. Like they get to the point where they can produce work that's like pretty good, where people go, oh, I like that. And it's like, line up. There's a million artists producing work like that. You need to keep going until you're great, until you produce work that's instantly recognizable as yours, that enough people just fall in love with and will make poor financial decisions to own, right? It's like, if you want to be a professional golfer, you can't be an 8 handicapper and make a living, right? It's like, you need to first of all master all of the skills, because there's a lot of people out there selling pretty good art for very low prices. So why is someone going to pay $8,000 or $16,000 for one of my paintings? It's because it's at a objectively better painting. But the thing to understand too is, in the village of commercial sales, like how do we decide what is great art, right? Like that's the question. Well, it's not a person or critic that decides. The public decides, and the public decides by exercising their vote with their wallet. And so it's like, in this village, if you want to make a living from your art, you need to produce art that people love more than most other artists' work. And because if you're just in that group of kind of really nice, I like it, you're in that group where people are still shopping based on value, where they'll go, okay, well, this one's cheaper. And that's why having a unique voice is so important too. It's just like music, right? Like music's the same thing. You look on American Idol, there's all kinds of people that come on that are technically great singers, but they sound like a bunch of other technically great singers. And they end up doing corporate gigs, but you have someone that comes out that just sounds unique, that as soon as you hear them, you go, oh, that's gotta be Springsteen, right? That's gotta be Rod Stewart, whatever. It's the same with art. If you can create something that people love, but it's unique, and you have a unique way of putting together your art, then you're the only game in town. They can't go to someone else and get a cheaper version of that. Then the only question is, can they afford what you're charging? But most artists stop before they get there. Most artists stop developing when they get to that pretty good point, and then they spend the rest of their life trying to market that work. And that's why they're starving.
Yeah. Well, so what do you think? Can we talk a little bit about just, I want to dig a little deeper on reputation and sort of, you've described it as your voice, but I think it's kind of the same thing, which is, the persona or the whatever you've become.
The brand.
And like we were talking about before, like when you start out doing artwork, like you could probably make a living doing artwork that you hate. And then you've kind of created this trap, right? Where
Yep.
you're busy doing whatever artwork other people want, but you're not actually executing on the thing that made you want to paint in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, so a lot of people have reputations. They get it for a number of different reasons, right? Some are, crazy. They do wild things, to point, back to your meat dresses or your bananas on walls. And then other people, maybe more in your camp or maybe more in your art village that you described, is reputation is maybe less important, and it's more about just the output and do I like it, and is it on theme this year, and do people, are they into it? So it's kind of maybe a different approach where I don't know, and you can tell us, Tim. I mean, obviously we're just meeting you today, but like, I don't know. I mean, like, are you the guy with the top hat and the monocle that runs around and Tim Packer's, this wild, crazy guy? Or like, I mean, so what's your take on just, reputation in general as it depends, or, and you could call it brand, you can call it voice, whatever it is, but what's your thought about that for artists?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that I've often found that the, that whole stereotypical kind of thing of the artist of like wearing a beret and being the delicate kind of genius. And I've often found that the more affectation someone has, it's in inverse proportion to the quality of their art. I mean, I'm a member of the Canadian Watercolor Society. I served on the board for a number of years and was president. So I've gotten to know a lot of Canada's top artists and a lot of the US's top artists as well. And I found that kind of the more talented and successful they are, the more just like a regular Joe they are. You would never guess that. Again, there's little pretense or affectation in there. But what I would say too about kind of finding your voice, about kind of that, and this is what I recommend for my students too, is ideally you want to get to the place where three things are happening, right? Where you absolutely love the painting process of creating your paintings, that you're doing what you love more than anything else in the world. And you are happy and proud of the paintings themselves to be able to say, this is what I do. And then where enough people actually love the work to sustain a really good living too. And then the big question is, how do you find that, right? And that's, I mean, the main thing is, first of all, mastering all the skills, right? Drawing, composition, brushwork, kind of perspective, atmospheric perspective, all that kind of stuff. But then it's spending time in what's called process mode, where you're out of your comfort zone and you're just trying lots of different things. And the problem there with a lot of artists is, they develop a certain amount of skill where they can produce kind of moderately competent paintings, doing the things that they're confident in. And then they try something new and it doesn't work out. And so it's, oh, that didn't work out. And then they try something else and it doesn't work out. And now whenever they think of stepping outside of their comfort zone, they get the fear of failure, and the lizard brain kind of rears up because, oh, the last few times I've failed. But what's important to understand is when you're in process mode, you're supposed to have failures. So the very first thing you have to do is when you're trying something you don't know how to do, and this is actually for business as well. When you're doing something you don't know how to do, you have to give permission for it to fail before you start, because that removes the anxiety. And then if you fail, well, failure is where learning happens too, right? But in that process mode is also where breakthroughs happen. That's where all of a sudden you might create a painting better than anything you've done before, or there might just be one area in the painting that's like, wow, look what happened there. Well, how did I do that? Now you take that. Now when you go back to product mode, you've got more tools, more knowledge, more experience, more skills. So your caliber of work just keeps going up. But while you're in that process mode of trying all this stuff, you're keenly attuned to, how much do I enjoy painting like this? How much do I like the finished result, and what's the impact of people who see it? And so you're just kind of continually guided by that, and that leads you down a certain road where eventually you have that breakthrough moment where it's like you think, wow, I love painting this painting more tan I've ever loved doing a painting before. I think it's my best painting I've ever done. And the public goes crazy over it. And then you're like, okay, I guess this is what I can do. I can ride this pony to the grave if I want. And then you're never satisfied too. I still spend every year, I spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks where I'll go off into process mode because I think, well, maybe there's something else but I haven't found it yet. I found a few things that I enjoy doing, but not as much as this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
So I'm not an artist. Well, I guess I am an artist in certain ways, but as far as like
You're a music
drawing
guy.
and painting and stuff like that, I've tried it a few times, and every single time I try it, I look at that, I'm like, oh man, that is a piece of junk. piece of, it looks like crap. Like, like you don't want to show it to anyone. That little sketchbook that I got is tucked behind the back corner, and I only pull it out when I'm doing rough stuff because I don't want anyone seeing it.
Nobody starts good.
I know.
It's funny. It's exactly the same as music. Actually, there are so many parallels with art and music in terms of not even just the words, like composition and rhythm and kind of all this kind of stuff, but what it takes to be successful, right? Is like it's exactly the same thing. And again, in music, right, especially in popular music, the public decides.
Yeah. So
but nobody starts good at art, and that's the thing. I guess another thing that's important to note too is when you look at people who are extremely successful and extremely talented now, we tend to think that they were just like that, and we don't see that they started as an absolute beginner doing absolute crap. They might have just started earlier, but I mean, I've never met anybody that when you look at their very first drawings, you go, "Oh my God, that's brilliant!" Right? And same with, I mean, I went to art college, and I was the only person in art college. When we go to parties, people would pass the guitars around. And I was the only one that didn't play, because so many people that play music also are into art. And then I talked about that for so many years. And at my 40th birthday, my wife got me a guitar, and I started trying to play, and I quit because it's like, this is so hard, right? Like, I don't have time to invest the amount of time to make it even just get moderately competent here. Like, I need to be working on my business and that. But I got to the point where I could do Smoke on the Water and the intro for Law and Order. And that's 3 months I'm not getting back. It's this is really hard.
That's what I always tell my boys. I'm like, if you can learn like 20% of guitar, you're better than 80% of people, and that'll work out so good in like your dating life or whatever. Because I got teenage boys.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you guys just got to pick up 20% of guitar.
Nothing cooler than a kid that plays guitar.
Yep.
Right?
If you can just do something with a little attitude and toss your hair or something, you'll be set.
Yeah.
So, so one of the things I wanted to dig into a little bit more, and we talked about it more at the top, was around this notion of belief. You pointed out something which I think is hilarious, because we've run into that on this show a few times too, which is that basically these self-help kind of folks, they always seem to stop short of a plan. So it's like, you're going to find all your success if you do this, and you talked about, sort of setting your mind on, I'm going to act as if for this year and see what happens. I've done versions of this before. The one that I think's the most hilarious or embarrassing or whatever is I read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It has this thing in there about having a mantra, and if you read it every day, you can help manifest this thing into reality. So every day I had stuck on my wall this picture, or the this sentence or two that was, oh well, this year I'm going to make this amount of money and all this kind of stuff. I did not at the end of the year, so unfortunately I was unable to manifest that. But I did later realize, I was like, well, the problem is these guys, like the Napoleon Hills, like they ultimately made their money selling the idea of this is how you find success.
Yes.
So they were self-help people. That's how they made their money. It's not like they, built some kind of thing or whatever, but this is how that guy made his money, was by telling people how to find success.
By selling the woo-woo.
Yeah, it's this weird circular thing. And I'm not putting down that book, because I think it's great, and I think there's a lot of real good knowledge in there. But as it pertains to belief, I think there's a couple different routes here. And one is, so if we understand that we can be free as artists to do whatever we want to do, right? Chase the thing that you actually want to do. And this may be one of the areas where you actually could chase a passion. I think you have a lot of people who believe they're giving all they can give, or they're doing all they can do, or whatever, or they may believe that they've already achieved it. And so they're believing, in the sense of, hey, I'm trying to follow my belief, and if I believe long enough, it's going to work out. But I think for a lot of those people, it just never happens, right? And I think part of it is they're believing, or they believe, or whatever, but maybe they're misguided or they're missing something. So can you talk about just like, as you teach your students and as you start to work with people on finding belief? I mean, I definitely believe in the part that is, you have to have faith that what you're doing is the right thing, right? And I do think in general, even if it's a snowplow, like you can eventually push your way to some level of success, even if you're not talented or if you're doing stuff wrong. Like in a lot of cases, I think just sticking with something long enough will bear fruit. But
but I
you know,
do
but where are
think
you at on belief?
you have to have a plan too, right? Like it took me 5 years and I was already an accomplished artist when I left the police force. It took me 5 years to make $30,000. I had the opportunity to mentor a young artist who was a daughter of a golf buddy of mine. She just graduated from landscape architecture, and she'd got to know me, and to her father's chagrin, my influence kind of led her to tell them that she didn't want to be a landscape architect. She wanted to be an artist. And after 4 years of university, and I mentored her. We met every month and we filmed all her stuff to go up on YouTube. But she was able to make $30,000 in 1 year, in her very first year. And now her work sells for more than mine. And that's the difference of having a plan. But the biggest thing that I see for like the people that believe I'm doing what I believe, and it's like I'm there, I'm creating the work I meant to create. It's kind of like you don't get to decide. In my village, the public decides and the public speaks. And if you believe you're creating this work and you put it out there and the reaction is, then that's not it. And there's no amount of marketing or anything else that's going to make people go, oh, all of a sudden I love this work. So it's like back into the studio. But the biggest thing that I teach is like there's a logical progression of skills and concepts that you should master. Because I think ideally, you want to master everything about art, all of the skills, all of the conceptual knowledge, and then take that into the studio and trying to create whatever it is you're going to create. But the first thing is to look for the domino. What's the biggest thing right now that I haven't mastered, that if I master it, it would have an impact on everything I do going forward. And for most artists, it's drawing and composition. I go out to an art festival, I go out, just walk around seeing. It's like 99% of the people there haven't mastered drawing, and 99% of them don't know anything about composition. And composition in art is the same as in music, right? It's like if you've got a great song that's beautifully composed, a group of kindergarten kids can sing it and it still sounds beautiful. And it's the same with a painting. And if you've got a poorly composed song, even Michael Bublé can't sing it good unless he changes the composition. And so most artists are out there right off the bat, they're producing work that is poorly composed and poorly executed. And then they're wondering why the world isn't rewarding them for a living, because they're like, I put my heart and soul into that. And it's like, yeah, there are people who put their heart and soul into singing in the shower, but you don't get to make a living at it unless you are good enough that people go, oh my God, I love it, I want to have it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like as I've hired creative talent over the years, I've always put like maybe a disproportionate amount of value on hand skills and being able to do something with your hand and work on composition and be able to draw and, being able to see things and then reproduce it out of your mind,
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people, especially younger generation folks, have just grown up in the computer doing graphic design. Yeah. So it's the equivalent of your person who just goes and buys a paintbrush, but they never knew how to draw, I guess, or never knew how to draw. Yeah. And I think, yes, you can be a very competent designer who can't draw. But I find, at least for me, when I'm hiring people who are creative talent, or if I'm trying to work with people who are creative talent, I typically find that the ones that have developed a hand skill over their lives are typically the safer bet, at least in terms of their general ability to create output. Doesn't mean they're the most skilled technically. I mean, you can have really technical painter that can, paint his butt off, but not necessarily be able to draw a picture. I mean, I know lots of photographers like that they know how to use the machine that takes pictures, but they don't necessarily have an artistic eye. Yeah. And so developing that skill, I think, is important.
And I think too, it's just like at the end of the day, what you want to do is give yourself the best chance possible to achieve success, right? And I just firmly believe, like I think of it like when you come to the easel to paint, you've got your artistic tool belt. The more tools you have in that belt that you have mastered, the better chance you're actually going to achieve success. And it's kind of like, like if you can't draw very well, it's like, well, if you think of, the gamut of all art that's possible, if you can't draw very well, you're taking a lot of that off the table, that you're not going to be able to do that. And then it's kind of like if you don't understand color theory, it's like, well, that's a lot in art, right? So I think it's just the whole idea of, first of all, just master all the stuff. And then go in and just see what you can create, go into that kind of process mode. But I think it's like, it's like, do you have to be in absolutely amazing shape to be a professional athlete? No, there's some first basemen, there's some, curlers, there's some people who are not in great shape, but that's not a strategy, right? It's not a strategy to go, well, I'd like to be a professional athlete, but I'm not going to get in good shape. It's kind of like, there are some artists out there. Yeah, there are some exceptional artists out there who really can't draw very well, but are incredibly successful. But that's not the rule. That's not a real good strategy, right? I think it's best to give yourself the best chance to succeed. And the one thing we can all do is continually learn and improve and master the various skills and concepts.
So, what are your thoughts on in any like creative process? There's like, as a DJ, I look up to other DJs. As a musician, I look out to other musicians, and dude, he's doing something cool. Let me try that. It's probably the same in in the artist world, that you have other artists that you look up to, or you might try to emulate as you're first getting started. Is that part of the process, or is that something that you should avoid as an artist?
No, it's absolutely, it's just like music, right? I love hearing my favorite artists whenever they start interviewing them, like musical artists. The best usually have a huge variety of influences that, it's like they maybe studied piano when they were a kid, and then they were in the high school band, and then they had a garage band, and they played country for a while, then they were in punk, and now they're taking all of these influences and they're mixing them up in their own way. So that's actually what I encourage my artists to do. So when you're in that process mode, is identify artists whose work just, takes your breath away and makes your mouth water, and then use them as influences, and kind of go through, first of all, try and look at like, what's the filter that they see the world through. Van Gogh, obviously it was just like strokes of broken color. Chuck Close, if you know him, one of my favorite artists, 20th century, he's got these big squares of abstracts, but when you stand back, it resolves into like a lifelike portrait. But like, try to discover their filter, how they see the world differently, and then what techniques they use, and then try to paint your own paintings like them. And do that several times until you've learned, because your talent is just your skills, knowledge, experience, and creativity. And when you're doing that, you're pushing your creativity, you're building new skills, you're learning new experiences. Then you do that with several different artists. And then you go into the studio again, just in pure process mode, and say, okay, now taking everything that I knew before and everything that I've learned by kind of using these influences, I'm just going to try and create my own work, kind of mixing it all up. And then that's where you're really focused on too, like, which of those exercises did I really love the process? And which ones where I think there was something really cool that came out of the paintings too. And so you're taking a little bit from this artist, a little bit from this artist, a little bit from this other artist, and then you're kind of mixing them together, and then you're just seeing what happens, right? You might have a dog's breakfast. The one thing I would say though, is if you've mastered all of the technical skills and you've mastered composition, all of this work still should be pretty good. And I was in that mode for about 2 years, where I was doing exactly this. And if you came to my tent at an art festival, people would walk in and go, is this all by the same artist? Because my work was like all over the place. And I would say, yeah, it is. It's mine. And they were like, wow. And I said, yeah, I'm trying to find myself. But all of the work, because I had mastered the skills and had a really good sense of composition by then, all of the work was still pretty good. So I still sold most of what I was doing, but I wasn't getting that over the top reaction. But the funny thing here is I got so many people coming up to me, artists and clients, saying, Tim, all of this stuff is pretty good, but you would do better if you just pick a niche and just kind of focus on that. And thank God I didn't listen to them. And that also is what a lot of artists do. And that is the advice they're getting, because no, it's not time to pick a niche until you create that work that people go absolutely gaga over. And then if you love the process, then it's time to pick. But what's the point in picking a niche that is just getting that's pretty good results, right? And so fortunately for me, I didn't do that. And I kept kind of just being all over the map until that kind of aha moment came. But most artists stop before they get there. And one of the reasons they stop is there's all of these art consultants out there telling them, pick a niche. It's like, no, your niche will find you. You don't get to just pick it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, in business and, in art, obviously, I mean, people chase down this notion of niching. And I think for a lot of artists and creative types, they feel like it's kind of putting up boundaries anyway, like they don't feel good about it. And, I have heard both sides of the case. And I think in business, and sometimes it does make sense. But I don't think it's so much about niching as much as it is about getting your messaging right. Or at least that's how it works in business, is that, it's about being able to articulate what you do to the people who want to buy it. And it's not, I mean, you may niche, but it's not about putting up boundaries. Instead, it's about definition and being able to define who you are. And I think that, for an artist specifically, they have the great opportunity, which is their, definition of self can be derived from a broad range of work or a number of different things, And to your point, I think eventually you kind of do fall into the stuff that you like to do, and you draw the way you like to draw, or paint the way you like to paint, or sculpt the way you like to sculpt. And you kind of figure that out. But the only way you get there is through starting big, or broad, and experimenting and trying things, and, and working your way down. And to your point, I think a lot of these artists get these consultants in their ear, or these YouTube experts or whatever, and they, I guess, niche too soon. So they go, well, I already know how to do this, so I'll do that, I guess. But they're cutting out all the exploration that would have led to better work down the road.
Yeah, I liken it to this. It's like if the job is to find your favorite food in the world, right? You got a lot of tasting to do. Mm-hmm. And it's to find out what's your favorite way of expressing yourself, whether it's through paint, through sculpture, or whatever. You got a lot of tasting to do. And so you've got to try everything. You don't know, you might be, again, like me, I thought I was going to be the next great portrait artist, and I had a really good skill set. There was nothing there that predicted I would become one of Canada's top landscape painters. Right. And so it's like, but the idea that, that artists start painting and then pretty quickly go, well, this is what I do. It's like, I mean, occasionally it happens. I had one of my students, Emily Valentine. I mean, she started painting 5 years ago, joined the Art Academy, and she's just kicking it now. But she pretty quickly kind of settled on still lifes that she wanted to do, but that are absolutely brilliant. And so she, right after COVID ended, she did her first show in Toronto. She sold out her first show. She raised her prices, sold out her next show, sold out her third show. Now she just sells everything she paints online through her social media. She just won. There's a what's the Kellogg's art competition. It's like a big art competition. She won $50,000 first prize last year in that. And I mean, she found her voice like literally in a year, which I think is great, but it also kind of bothers me that, geez, that young whippersnapper,
Well, I think it demonstrates, that there's such a range here. And, for people who, especially folks who are sort of, I would say, artistically inclined, I mean, I agree with your point that it's not really about talent per se. But I think that there are a lot of people who actually start developing these skills pretty young, and they just kind of work on it forever. So we talk about it on this show as being this 10-year overnight success, which is, It seems like she just landed on still lives, but, was she always drawn to still lives?
And she had the
she's
skills.
Not the best case, but
she had the skills. But I'm just saying, but the thing is, she found her voice very, very quickly, and it's a great voice, and people responded to it. But that's pretty quick. But even for me. But the thing that's important for artists to know is that if you stick with the process of doing this, you will find your voice. But what most artists want, like they ask me, like, can you help me make a living creating the art I'm making now? And the answer is probably no. Because if that was possible, you would be making, because the public decides. I can't all of a sudden, kind of wave a wand and say, okay, now people are going to buy your work. And you can't, if people aren't buying your work, you have an art problem. And there's no amount of business solutions that can solve an art problem. It's like the number one thing is, you need to be consistently creating work that enough people are willing to spend a fair bit of money to take home with them. And so you need to figure out a way to do that. And it's just that it's not possible to kind of stop and go, well, this is what I love, and so I'm going to make a living, because you don't get to decide. The public decides.
Yeah. So here in our closing few minutes, Tim, I just wanted to maybe take a minute and just talk about sort of, the business of art, in that I think a lot of, creative people anyway, kind of don't think of themselves as being business people. They think of themselves as being artistic and creative. And I do this even in my business. I mean, we've been in business for almost 20 years now, and I'm still just like, well, I'm art guy first, and, business guy fifth, sixth, seventh, whatever. And I still believe that, by the way. But I think for a lot of artists, the notion of having to do their accounting or think about the business or the processes involved in running their business, of art, I think might feel a little foreign to them, because they just kind of want to come and do their art. And so I wonder how you address that with people.
I'm just straight up that if you want to be an artist, you are an entrepreneur. And every single thing that you hear and read about that applies to entrepreneurs applies to being an artist. And the other thing that I'll say, there's a couple of sayings that I really hate. One of them is that if you do what you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life. It's like, yeah, that would be a nice life, but it's not reality. I like to change that to that. If you have the audacity to want to make a living doing the thing that you love, you better be willing to work harder at that than anything you've ever done in your life. And you also you better be willing to do the things that you don't want to do, but that you know are necessary. Things like marketing, things like doing the accounting, things like, learning social media. It's kind of everything. It's like you need to be willing to do all of the stuff that's required to be successful. The thought of just being able to go in your studio and paint and then somehow generate a living from that's like nice world if you could find it, but it's not reality. I get artists, when I tell people what I think they should do, and it's like, well, I would recommend doing this. And often I'll get, well, I don't want to do that. And I just say, well, what you're saying is I don't want to be successful bad enough to do that. And that's fine, because then your art should be a hobby. But if you want to make a living, you are an entrepreneur. And so business is necessary. You have to do all the same things that any entrepreneur does for their business if you want to be successful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, cool. So as we're getting to the last few minutes here of our time together, Tim, I wonder if you just want to take a few minutes and kind of break down how people can connect with you or find you online, join the business, learn more about your school, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah. So, I've just released my new book, You Can Sell Your Art. It's a step-by-step guide to make a livable income from your art. So it's on Amazon. They just search that on Amazon. They can find me on YouTube as well. I have like hundreds of free videos out there, content to help artists. And then I also have my online art academy, and that's at www.timpackerartacademy.com. So I have a number of courses that are kind of like just recorded courses. And then I also have what I call my Hungry Artist community. And that's where you get all of my courses. But every week I hop on a live Zoom call for a couple hours and I critique artists' work, offer coaching advice, and answer their questions.
Love it.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking that was really cool that you have the online academy where you can work with people directly. Thank you so much, Tim, for making time for us. Really appreciate you coming in and talking about the art industry.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.